Hello, everybody. I am your late arriving chair, Adair Turner, chair of the Energy Transition Commission, and I'm very pleased to be chairing this session on shipping and green hydrogen. As I mentioned just in the plenary session on the forecast that some of you may have been at the Energy Transition Commission, we believe that shipping will be one of the absolutely crucial sectors for the use of green hydrogen. That green hydrogen could be used in methanol, or it could be used in ammonia. Our own belief is it's more likely in the long term to be ammonia. But what's interesting, when you look at how much green hydrogen goes into a kilogram of methanol or a kilogram of ammonia, and when you look at the calorific density of a kilogram of methanol or a kilogram of ammonia, it doesn't make much difference whether the system goes methanol or ammonia. You end up with roughly the same amount of green hydrogen which is required, which could be as much as 80 to 100 million tons by 2050. But as in many sectors, I think in shipping, there is also a chicken and egg. You can't go out there and buy a methanol burning container ship until you know that when you turn up at Port of Rotterdam, Port of Singapore, wherever in Pearl River Delta, wherever it is, that somebody's going to have methanol or ammonia to put into your ship. So we have been working in the what's called the Mission Possible Partnership and working closely with the Global Maritime Forum on what's called green corridors. How do we make sure that there is the simultaneous development, not necessarily everywhere in the world immediately, but at least on a set of key strategic routes where people can begin to run zero-carbon ships based on some or other version of green hydrogen down those routes to get it going, getting that coordination of supply and demand. And that, in turn, raises some very interesting issues about where we're going to produce green hydrogen and where we're going to put it into ships, because there are certainly some people thinking I could do a green hydrogen and green ammonia plant somewhere near the Suez Canal, Red Sea, where the container ships or the bulk carriers are passing in any case, and why don't they pick up their fuel right off my ammonia plant rather than me shipping it off to a port to bunker it there. So there's some very interesting issues about the location at which we will produce the key input to the future of shipping industry, the pace at which we will do the changeover. And in order to think about these issues, we need to think about the role of ports, the role of governments, the role of shipping companies. So, to discuss these issues this morning, we have Birgitta Jordan Andersen, who is a partner of Schott. Right, good. We have, right over there, Juan Pablo Perez, the head of port planning at the port of Algeciras. You'll pronounce it correctly.
Algeciras.
Okay, Algeciras. We have Faik Abbasov, Shipping Program Director at Transport of the Environment, and we have Kasper Solgaard, Managing Director of Global Maritime Forum. We do not have, that just to be confirmed, the final person I was told who would be here is from Indonesia. They're not lurking somewhere. Okay, the organizers will let me know. So I think what would be useful would be to just begin with a set of your open thoughts on what is required to drive the feasible development of the decarbonization of shipping. Where have we got to? What are the technologies? What are the policies? How do we drive it forward? And I'm going to go to you, Kasper, first to give us the point of view from the Global Maritime Forum. Far away.
Thank you so much, Adair, and it's a pleasure to be here. In the Global Maritime Forum, we work together with more than 200 companies from the broader energy shipping value chain with one goal in mind. We call this the Getting to Zero Coalition. We're working together with the World Economic Forum. And our mission is to have commercially viable zero-emission ships trading on deep-sea routes by 2030, supported by the right fuel infrastructure and the port infrastructure. And the long-term goal, that's also, we had a call to action last year, sets out that we want to fully decarbonize international shipping by 2050. So just a couple of basic facts about shipping. Today, shipping burns around 300 million tons of oil, and that generates around 3% of global GH2 emissions. So if we are to reach the Paris Agreement goals to stop climate change, we need to decarbonize shipping. And green hydrogen and green hydrogen-derived fuels are one of the key solution to do this, and I think if you saw the presentation that Adair did in the previous session, it's probably the leading candidates for the fuels. So what is needed to go there? First of all, and I think we also and I think we'll be hearing this a lot during the conference, it's not a technology problem. We have technologies to build zero-emission ships and to produce the fuels. It's a problem around commercial viability. We can only get to scale once it makes commercial sense to invest in the ships and the fuel production. And to get there, because of course today fossil fuels are a lot cheaper than the hydrogen-derived fuels, we need two things. We need policy and we need partnerships. We need policy to incentivize the uptake of zero-emission fuels, and we need policies to put a price on pollution. On partnerships, we need to bring the value chain together, and I'm glad you mentioned the green corridors, because building those partnerships that involve the right actors that have a shared interest and can solve that chicken and egg problems. And being here in Spain, I think it's just happy to say that Spain is one of the countries that have that opportunity with the big ports like Port of Algeciras, a huge potential to produce renewable fuels. Spain could be one of the key hubs in a network of green corridors, but it really requires also the governments and the policymakers to seize that opportunity, both to create jobs, but of course also to deal with climate change.
Thank you very much. That was very clear, Casper. Can I go to Juan Pablo then? I mean, how, from your Port Bay Authority point of view, do you see this development of green corridors? How are we going to drive this progress forward?
Okay, thank you very much. We fully agree with the perspective that Casper is announcing here, because actually what we have been doing these recent years is quite similar as what he has suggested that we should be doing. Is there's a number of companies that are interested in investing in the production of hydrogen very close to our area. They're interested in the Port of Algeciras because it's the way to put this massive production of hydrogen, because in the production of hydrogen and ultimately the price of the hydrogen that we can achieve, size matters. So it's not the same to produce 50 megabytes, go for a project which is with aim of 500, of even 1 gigabyte. There are companies trying to develop these projects right now in the area, not only in Algeciras, but also in some parts and some ports where very close to the port of Algeciras. But the thing is that what can we do with this hydrogen? But there's an economy there, because the Central Europe is willing to get all this hydrogen for this industry. We have also our own industry, but our own industry doesn't support, it doesn't justify such a huge investment. But we have the logistics, so we can produce this hydrogen, we can ship it to North Europe. We're in collaboration with several ports that are working in that route. So it's going to be, so we're going to have not hydrogen, of course hydrogen, but not only hydrogen, but also ammonia as the most likely way to transfer this hydrogen to North Europe. So once we have ammonia in our ports at a reasonable price, then is when we can go for the shipping and say, okay, we are ready to deliver and to secure the logistics chain. So we can perhaps later go on and give more details on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, it's interesting to think about, I mean, Casper, you said the aim, ideally, of the industry is to get to net zero by 2050. Of course, I think at the moment the IMO is still formally on its 50% reduction, but under pressure to move to a 100%. Leading companies like Maersk have made a 100% commitment. But although we at the ETC are very strong supporters of moving down the ammonia route, we do think that that will increase freight rates. We do think that this will be more expensive, in which case there is, again, one of these chicken and egg collective action problems. It's not going to occur unless there is some category of policy, either a carbon price or a fuel duty mandate, a requirement for a percentage burn. So I don't know whether either of the subsequent two speakers would like to comment on that or on other aspects of how do we get how do we actually drive this progress, which, as Casper said, is completely technologically possible. Birgitta.
So I'm representing my law firm Schutt, but I've been working in Brussels for 20 years, regulating both the power and the gas sector. So yes, we need policies, but we also need regulation. But I think you need very clear policies. And there was a reason, for instance, that the UE actually achieved 20%. Working within the commission, I worked at that time in DG Energy, there was everything will be solved by the ETS. And as you know, the shipping industry will be going into the ETS with no free allocation from 2025. Yeah. But I think you actually need to go beyond that. And you need to work with governments. I usually say when I'm in Norway, don't, in the spirit of John F. Kennedy, do not always ask what your country can do for you. What can you do for your country? And I think this assembly is a very good example of that. You need also to come to the government, come with good ideas, not just to criticize. I've been sitting on the other side of creating law, and it's very easy to criticize, but it may be also some difficult to find the good regulatory solutions. And I think tomorrow there will be a big package, for instance, in EU coming out. And what I'm fearing, as I said to governments, make it easy, but also on the demand side, work with them, and contract for difference is the buzzword, both globally and also in the EU. And I think that's also what you need to go. You need to make support systems. You need to make a price in order to lift and actually feed the chicken before it lays its egg.
Well, thank you. I mean, you raised the question of carbon prices, and the European Union has the emissions trading scheme, and shipping will go into it without free allowances. But of course, that is only going to affect the fuel which is picked up in Europe. Europe cannot impose that price across the world. In sectors like steel or cement, the way forward is to apply a border carbon adjustment at the border on imports. But again, that doesn't really apply to shipping in the same extent. This is an inherently global industry. The good news is that it does have a global regulator. And there are two industries across the world, shipping and aviation, where we have global regulators, IMO and ICAO, which do have global international lawmaking power. Power which originally arose out in both cases from safety concerns, but which the IMO has clearly shown in relation to desulfurization, it can apply to assets as environment as well. So I guess one of the interesting questions is going to be, how far can we make progress on this on unilateral European or other action? How far do we really need the IMO to step up to the task of imposing fuel duty mandates or prices at a global level to really drive this through? And of course, there have been calls by some of the leading companies for a global carbon price. I don't know whether, Feig, you'd like to comment on that or any other issues.
Sure. Well, great to be here. Thank you very much. I'm representing Transport and Environment, which is Europe's largest transport NGO. We work, as the name suggests, only on transport-related issues. Our headline objective is transformation of transport sector through technological innovation. And our vision, our theory of change is that technological transition will happen through policy. This is a bit of a give out right from the beginning. We're a big believers in policy driving the technological change. Now, coming to the policy, what type of policies would like to see? I fully agree with Casper and others before me. Yes, technology is there, but it is expensive and there are many problems, hurdles for their uptake. Infrastructure issues, cost issues, in some cases safety issues, but those can be resolved. And in Europe, we have been deeply involved in the European Fit for 55 package that will, for the first time, regulate shipping as well. And there are two regulations, two proposals for regulation. One is carbon pricing for shipping, inclusion of shipping in the ETS. And I should also note that that was the first project I worked at TNE 6 years ago. And this is the third time we are trying to get shipping in the EU emissions trading scheme. And as they say, third time you're successful. Hopefully, fingers crossed. And as part of the ETS, we will see ships pay for the pollution, and that will help reduce the price gap. Unfortunately, not bridge just yet, but reduce the price gap. But we can be creative, we can be innovative, and as Bridget before me said, carbon contracts for difference, basically pulling the ETS revenues together in one pot and using it strategically to pay down or reduce the price gap, rather bridge the price gap between the clean fuels and the dirty fuels. And that way we can de-risk the investments of the first movers and help them operate their zero-emission vessels on a commercial basis. But the key will be the demand-driving regulations. I carefully listened to your intervention in the previous session, Lord Turner, that your first out of the four
was demand.
Do not focus on supply just yet. It is the demand. We're a bit lucky because Europe also planning to adopt a demand-driving regulation for alternative fuels in shipping in Europe. It's called Fuel EU Maritime Regulation. With a weird name, difficult name to remember, but it's essentially a fuel standard. It's a minimum quotas to use alternative fuels in shipping. The problem is, it is not designed to drive hydrogen or hydrogen-based fuels. That is a big mistake. Fortunately, there are some brilliant ideas on the table from Denmark, from Germany, from the Netherlands, and some other countries also in the European Parliament to have a dedicated target for hydrogen uptake by ships on their journeys to and from Europe. Essentially, the regulators are bypassing the cost difference or cost issues, hitting the nail on the head and saying, however much it may cost, you need to start using it. And that's the command and control. And we're strong believers in that. Now, coming back to your question that you originally gave me the floor for, IMO, IKEA. I have worked with IMO for the past 6 years, and before me, my colleagues, another 12 years before me. One thing we learned is that the organization does not move unless it is under huge pressure. And it's not the only one. There is IKEA, which is a sister organization regulating aviation. We think that shipping and aviation is lucky to have these global regulators, but we cannot put all our eggs in one regulator's basket. Those regulators, in our opinion, can help set the course, the targets, where we want to be in 2050, 2040, 2030. But thinking globally requires acting locally, and that's the motto in every single sector. And that's why we believe that regional regulations like the ones that are proposed by the European Union, but also bilateral green corridors that are launched under Clydebank Declaration in Glasgow in November last year, could be the right way to kickstart the process. And eventually, once we have enough critical mass of deployment of alternative fuels in the sector, we can use IMO to set a global standard, global minimum that everybody will have to conform with. But unfortunately, we cannot start there. That's going to be the next step. I would believe that local action should go first.
Okay, so it's local action, which then creates momentum, and then hopefully an IMO regulation at some stage. Good. I'm going to open it up to the floor in a minute. Please do think about any questions you want to ask, but I want to ask one extra question relating to this demand point. If we have to drive the demand in a way which makes it easy for the good guys to go ahead and do something which at least initially is more expensive. Now, in the plenary session earlier, I waved my little 100 grams of green steel that SSAB has produced. This green steel, even when they go from pilot plant to full production, will be costing probably at the moment about 25% more per ton of steel than doing it in the old coking coal blast furnace fashion. But this is okay because they are getting leading customers to be willing to pay that premium, in particular in the automotive industry, who will then want to turn around and make a consumer promise that when you buy this new automobile from them, it is made out of green steel. And that is also what H2 Green Steel are doing, and I'm sure that's what ArcelorMittal will be doing in their Spanish green steel plant. They are getting forward-looking customers to follow the green premium. So my question for all the panelists, anybody want, is this something we can imagine being powerful in the shipping industry? Can we persuade the big users of the shipping industry to say, we are willing to pay the premium for you to go down the green route? Shall I start with Birgitta? Any thoughts on this?
I just also think regulations should be smart. I would just take a parallel example in Norway for the electrical cars, and that you can have a premium, you have the regulation that you have to pay for it. But you could also and I think they actually do it in IMO, they give points to the good behaviors. Like for instance in Norway, you could drive in the bus lane or the taxi lane, and that drove the demand more than getting paid, because I think this regulation could also be a smart thing of energy first, for instance, that you get companies to think that you organize logistically in another way. So if you think about regulation in a little bit other way than just the stick and paying premium, but get them to want to do it by giving a gift. Well, it's a different way of driving a lane in the taxi lane, but it could be come first to the harbor.
Well, I'm going to ask Juan Pablo, could you imagine that, saying to people coming to the harbor, priority for the guys who are using the green fuel? Is there equivalent of lane preference? Does that work? Or comment on the customer covering the green premium? And I'll come to you as well, Casca, because I know you'll have a point of view on it. Juan Pablo.
Oh, well, thanks. Not all the ports are equal. Not all the traffics are equal. If you go for the traffic ferries going from ports in Spain of Valencia or Barcelona, they're going to the Baleares Island. They're going to pay a premium. It's easy to regulate that because it's somehow a local issue. The problem with regulations is usually Europe thinks it's a local issue, but in terms of shipping, it's not a local issue most of the time. We can refer to the ETS problem because in Europe it could work well, but not for all ports. We are in the south of Spain, and our competitors are in Morocco. So yes, and from, we have also a ferry traffic from, but the companies that are operating the lines, half of them are Moroccan. So it's not a local issue. We have to deal with them. We have to convince them. Or we go all together, or we're going nowhere. And we are suffering from that, and this. But also for the cost of the ETS, we are a transshipment port. So 85% of our traffic, which is 5 million TEUs a year, is transshipment. So 12 years ago, 15 years ago, there was no Tangier-Med port. Nowadays, they move 7 million TEUs a year. So where are those containers coming from? From European ports. So if we deliver ETS process that doesn't take into account that these shipping lines, which are not easy to transfer from fossil fuels to new fuels, carbon zero, similar, or low carbons, they're going to move those traffics to the south, to Morocco. So, and we are going to lose in Europe these traffics, and we are going to get exactly the same amount of carbon dioxide emitted to the atmosphere.
I mean, you're right on the sort of the cutting edge of that issue. It's quite interesting when you look at different sectors. We sometimes say steel has an international competitiveness problem, but cement on the whole doesn't. But cement does if you're right on the sort of, Bulgaria-Turkish border, or if you're right on the Spanish-Moroccan border, and that can be true of shipping as well, some of these points at the margin. But Casper, I want to come to you. I'm sure you've thought of how far can we use forward-looking customers to drive this, how we cover the green premium?
Exactly. So customers are a hugely important part of this, especially in the segments that transport high-value goods and are consumer-facing.
Yep.
So last year we saw a group of big multinational companies, IKEA, Amazon, Unilever, come out and saying, from 2040 onwards, they're only going to use shipping that's zero emission. And you can see the way the container lines, their big transport providers, really have upped their game. So one of the things that's driving this transition is the customer demand. We're also seeing this in some of the commodity trades. So in April, we signed a letter of intent together with 2 shipping companies as well as 2 big mining companies, so BHP and Rio Tinto, to explore the potential of having iron ore transported on zero-emission ships using ammonia as the preferred fuel from Australia to North Asia. So a lot of things are happening on the customer side. We're also seeing a lot of pressures from the financial sectors and investors. When we talk to our stakeholders, every time they meet with their bank and their investors, they're saying, what are you doing to reduce your emissions? And they have to come up with something. So it becomes part of doing business, investing in this. And this is exactly one of the mechanisms that we're trying to use to catalyze green corridors, because finding those areas where there are customers willing to pay a bit extra for that transport, that is how we get the transformation started. And I just wanted to comment on the point about more expensive transport cost, and you're actually was in the ETC Mission Possible report on shipping. So one of the examples that was given, because shipping is incredibly cheap.
Yeah.
If you have a pair of high-end trainers, they might be Nike, you transport them, you double the transport cost using more expensive fuels. When you're the consumer, and I don't know, I think at the time, I think you wrote $100. Maybe today with inflation in the US, maybe it's $150 at the shore, in the store in Los Angeles. This would add less than $1 to it. I had a conversation with an IKEA or a Nike people say they wouldn't even increase the price.
Yeah.
The value of being able to say that this has been shipped green when you have the right standards would pay for it. So there are a lot of customers that are willing to pay, and it doesn't matter. And when we talk to the ones that are in the bulk sector, the ones that are transporting boring stuff like iron ore, grains and all this, they say, we have oil prices. They fluctuate all the time.
Yep.
At the moment, we have really, really high prices, and we're still transporting this. As long as everyone pays the same, we're totally fine with this. But of course, if I have to pay double and my competitor pays half, it's going to be hard to be in business. So as long as everyone pays the same, it will have very limited impact outside certain special cases. Yeah. And that's why we have the customers, and then we need the policy to level the playing field. Then we can make the transition happen.
Feig, and then I'm going to the floor for questions. I hope there are some roving mics, or there may be, but we'll see. Otherwise, you'll have to shout. Right. Okay. Fine.
Casper brilliantly explained that, at the ship level, transporting using green fuel can cost a lot or look like very expensive, but at the product level, it's very small. And the question for us is how to get that passed on to the final consumers without breaking down the market. Nobody believes that it will. The issue here is, yes, some cargo owners are interested in having green transport services. But there is no universal definition of what a green transport service is, in the same way that we had the problem we discussed in the previous session. What is green hydrogen? It's exactly the same problem. Okay. If you talk to 100 different shipping service providers or cargo owners, whatever they are paying for, they will say, well, this is green enough. LNG will be green, first generation biofuels will be green, second generation biofuels will be green, anything will be green so long as it is in their contract. And I think that is the problem that we need to deal with, to set the standards to show what is acceptable, what is green, and what is not, what falls in that basket, which falls out of it. I think that is why we need to have the regulation, because if you leave it just to the markets, human beings are incredibly innovative, creative, and they can find minimum ways to justify their actions. But the policy is what will set the minimum standards for them to come out with.
I'm going to go to the floor. Just one other thought. We haven't talked about the short distance stuff, though you've touched on it a bit, Juan Pablo, with the ferries. I think it's worth knowing that while we're very confident that for the long distance shipping, it's probably likely to go ammonia or methanol being burnt in maritime engines, which are pretty equivalent to the ones that do current heavy fuel oil. At the shorter distance, we probably will do direct electrification, or we will do hydrogen, various hybrids. Very interesting issues in relation to cruise ships, the cruise ships that sort of go port to port round the Mediterranean. Can they be hydrogen? So there is a different issue at that level, but the big difference will be the intercontinental ones. Who would like to ask any questions to the panel in the final 10 minutes? There is a lady there. Is there a what's it? Do we have a mic, or is the system? How good are you at shouting? I think we can.
I'd like to hear the panel's opinion on blue hydrogen. Do you see it necessary for transition or a hindrance to switch?
Okay. The panel's point of view on blue hydrogen. I'm very glad that Andrew Forrest isn't in the room to hear you even use that word. But let's take, and I'm actually going to ask the panel one other related question, which is alternative intermediate options. There are some people in the shipping industry who want to put in gas-burning ships. I think, for instance, CGM, the big Marseille-based container shipping company, is going down that methane route, claiming that it's an intermediate technology, so that's actually using methane in the ship engines itself. You're asking the question about blue hydrogen, which is making the hydrogen and then the ammonia out of methane. Any thoughts on how should we approach that? Birgitta, why don't you start?
So
Which also relates to the question of standards, of
so
how we define what is green.
I think this is such a good point that was raised about the green, because that is what we see already now in contracts, and also now with this additionality coming out tomorrow in Europe. It's very, very complex. So when it comes to blue and green, I think in the long run, I think it just comes down to economy. The green will take over, because when the economy of scale is going to go up, it's the same thing with renewables. So there will be a crossroad where it will just be more economy in it to be green. But in that run, and with the security supply we have today, and maybe somebody's going to now nail me afterwards, I think there's also a transition. And actually in Norway, for instance, we do have CCS. We have projects actually not emitting, which is not that costly, and they have economies of scale very fast in the beginning. Whether these projects, how long they will survive, and then you have the lock-in effect in the taxonomy and all these global assessment and standards coming, I think the green will survive in the end and go faster when the economy of scales is going faster and the technology is going faster. But I think we are talking about a transition and go from everything to one day. If you think about, as you raised, infrastructure, offshore energy, building capacity, it's not done tomorrow, even if we want to wish it to be done tomorrow. But let's work also to get the green transition working with also a realistic point of view that we might need to have a little bit on time of getting there.
Okay.
And I think building
Kasper.
on that, I think one of the important things that whatever fuels that we're using, that we have the life cycle assessments, that we know what they're emitting. I think long term, I think the market will decide what the winning technologies are, and I think green hydrogen drive fuels are advantages. Also, a lot of the shipping assets that we have are long-lived assets. We have container ships running on LNG. We have ships being delivered that are running on LNG. And one of the interesting things that I think has happened in the debate over the past year and a half, we moved from LNG kind of being the final destination to LNG being a transition fuel. And we're now seeing companies looking into, can we add clean hydrogen into the LNG mix to reduce some of the emissions now? Can we transition our gas or LNG burning ships to ammonia ships down the line? So I think it's important that we focus on reducing all the emissions we can today. If that is also using blue hydrogen derived fuels or trying to put in synthetic methane in those ships, I think that's good, but I think long term the target should be we need to get to zero. But there might be different pathways and different ways of having that transition based on the investment that companies have made.
Right?
It's a tough question. In my previous life, I used to promote natural gas. I was working for a natural gas company, and I spend most of my time fighting it now. Natural gas or LNG-powered vessels have many problems, and the biggest one is the invisible one. That's the methane slippage coming from the vessels. Recently, we didn't want to take anything for granted. We took an infrared camera with a special filter, went to Rotterdam, and filmed a brand new CMA CGM container vessel, and that was built in 2020 with a brand new engine, and you can see how much methane is coming out of it. All you need to do is just look at it, and now there's an effort to quantify it.
Yeah.
LNG-powered vessels are doing more damage to climate than diesel vessels they are replacing. So in that sense, it can neither be a final destination nor a transition fuel. If you're looking for transition, you need to be reducing emissions as opposed to increasing emissions. In the long term, there is always a talk that LNG vessels can also run on biomethane or synthetic methane, basically another form of using hydrogen, right? You turn it into a synthetic hydrocarbon. It is possible, but there are two major issues. Biomethane is not scalable fuel. It depends on finite feedstock. And given that we're trying to reduce dependence on natural gas, especially from Russia in this geopolitical context, are we not better off putting all the available biomethane in the gas grid as opposed to burning it in ships? Every single person who has done serious analysis will say the gas grid is a better option. Synthetic methane, it is technically possible. There is nothing wrong with it. The only way it's going to work is, in a climate sustainable way, is if the CO2 that's used to produce methane is captured from atmosphere in the first place, so that you have the full cycle, that you take it from there and when you burn it goes up there. This is possible, it can be sustainable and it can be scalable. The only problem with it is more costly from the total cost of operation perspective than using hydrogen either directly or using it in the form of ammonia. And ultimately, it's going to be the market who will decide which of those options is more acceptable to the industry.
Though surely, Fag, there's another problem. I mean, if you put synthetic methane or biomethane in those ships, and if you say they're actually leaking methane, biomethane or synthetic methane is methane. Those leaks will cause as much global warming as fossil fuel methane. So you'll still have that problem. That was really fascinating what you said about doing the infrared. Juan Pablo, finally.
Well, I will focus on some aspects. It's not exactly shipping, but it's about the regulation and the standard of the companies that are trying to develop these huge projects in our area. They say, okay, we are not, we don't want to deliver that hydrogen production plant with the renewables or the solar or whatever, just adjacent to just close to the. What we want is to look for these new projects of renewable electricity that can be produced on the whole region of Andalusia, which is huge, and where there are much better places to locate these solar plants. And what we have to do is to connect properly this production of renewable electricity to our production hydrogen plant. And if the production of hydrogen is close enough to the port, we can transfer it to ammonia or whatever, and then ship it to Central Europe or whatever. So that makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. But in order to consider green, it should be new projects. That is not a problem in Andalusia, because we actually have a lot of solar projects that only can be achievable because the grid currently is not able to absorb all this energy and to transfer to Central Europe by the electric grid. So with these projects of hydrogen, we can make this new solar projects feasible, and all the surplus to be transferred to other parts of the world. But if we go for solar, and all the electrolyzers are going to be producing a limited amount of time. So the most effective way to produce hydrogen, which is cheap, is to use different sources of renewable energy. But if we use existing ones, then the European Commission considers it's not green, because we are eliminating this kind of energy from the grid, and so the mix is not balanced. Well, that could be perhaps some kind of blue hydrogen, but in my humble opinion, I think it's perfectly good, because what we are doing is to provide cheap hydrogen to produce cheap ammonia, who could be used in our industry and our chips. So perhaps in the future we can go for something that can sort this out.
Good. Oh, right. I'm going to take one more question. Sorry, this one here, and then very, very quick answers, because I do want to allow people to get to lunch roughly on time. Could you, Farah?
The first hydrogen fuel cell ship sailed commercially about 6 weeks ago in San Francisco Bay.
Yep.
You probably know it's a ferry boat. It uses pure hydrogen.
Yep.
And it's using it in a fuel cell configuration, because
Yep.
fuel cells can be daisy chained. Personal computers are daisy chained. You have a server farm. You daisy chain fuel cells to become more powerful. My question is, since it's already a ship at sea, it has no leakage of ammonia, it has no methane involved, is there some kind of a size limitation?
Yeah, okay. So hydrogen fuel cells, let's very quickly, anybody who wants to comment on this, I think the answer is it's a distance and size limitation, that at the shorter distances, the cruise ships, the ferries, we are likely to see either direct electrification with batteries, or we're likely to see fuel cell hydrogen. But I think most people are assuming you're not going to get a container ship or a bulk carrier to go from Australia to Europe with fuel cell. But does anybody want to challenge that or comment on that very quickly? Because I do want people to get to lunch on time. Feig, you want it?
Some analysis by International Council on Clean Transportation has actually challenged that.
Okay.
And they looked into liquid hydrogen fuel cell powered vessels. The key trick here is, if you're trying to keep the original tank size as a basis and replace it with a hydrogen, then you will be interested in doing two things. First, reducing the overall energy consumption of the vessel. That could be slow steaming or putting wind technologies and so on and so forth. And secondly, that is increasing the frequency of bunkering. Today, some of the big vessels can bunker once and go all around the planet on a single autonomy, on a single. This is no longer viable in fuels that have much lower calorific value, low density than diesel. From that perspective, it is possible. I think it will be interesting to see if those vessels can be or will be seeing their way to the market, taking into account, are they interested in bunkering more frequently or not? And secondly, what is the possibility of reducing the overall energy demand of the vessel so that those low density fuels are applicable?
Any other quick comments on that? I mean, the answer is let's let technological innovation work out what the best route is, and maybe there will be more role for the pure liquid hydrogen rather than liquid ammonia things. Casper, I'm going to give you any final thoughts on that technological issue, and then I'm going to wrap up.
No, just we're also seeing some companies testing using fuel cells as auxiliary power. So it's not necessarily an either or. You might have some and use that to kind of peak shave and optimize the. So they are being tested, and maybe long term we can see it also on an ocean-going vessel as a primary energy source.
Well, thank you everybody for attending. Thank you very much for our panel. Sorry I couldn't get to a couple of other questions. I'm sure some of the individual members of the panel will be willing to respond to them afterwards. And thank you all, and enjoy lunch and the rest of the conference.